Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you another review. It is now time for the final entry in the Spider-Man reviews, with the latest film in the series, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, with the videos up to now, you know my thoughts on every other film, obviously. Now, this film, it's been about a week since I've watched it, so my thoughts have really had time to congeal and set in. Overall, I could say I liked it. It's not as straightforwardly told as the predecessor, but I will say it handles multiple villains a lot better than Spider-Man 3 did. And I think on the whole I like it a lot better than Spider-Man 3 and better than Spider-Man 1. Now, whether I like it more than Spider-Man 2 in The Amazing Spider-Man will probably take a little bit of time to figure out. I can tell you it's a little bit more entertaining than The Amazing Spider-Man, but that's because, you know, Spider-Man already has his feet on the ground. You don't have to go through all the origin again, so you just go right into it and you can spend more time developing the villain and also developing the relationship between Spider-Man and Gwen, because that's really the heart of this film, which that might disappoint some people, but it doesn't really disappoint me. I think it's interesting to actually try to do a Spider-Man film like this. Now it'd probably work better with one villain, because Electro and the Goblin do kind of come in as subplot characters, but it's done in an interesting manner, which I will discuss. You know, as I think about it, I think I like this maybe on par with the predecessor and 2. If I had to rank which one I like more, it's kind of hard to tell, but I think I like them more or less about the same. I'll say Spider-Man 1 and Amazing Spider-Man Spider-Man 2 and Amazing Spider-Man handled their villains a little bit better, but then again, they each only had one villain each, so it's easier to handle. But not to say that it doesn't handle its villains well. Now, one thing I will say is I really disagree with the rating from the critics, anyway. It has a 7.5 on IMDb, which I have a feeling that score is probably going to lessen as more people watch the film and vote, but that's around. I think it's probably going to be at least a 6.8. Has a 74 with the audience. Has a 54 with the critics. Let that sink in. That's a couple points higher than Man of Steel. Man of Steel I could see having like around a 50, even though I think it should be at least around a 60 or 70. But think about this. That's lower than Spider-Man 3. There's actually a meme floating around with a scene of J. Jonah Jameson from Spider-Man 2 in that laugh scene with the 3 scores on top of each other. I could just imagine another one edited with that, and then below it's him going, "You're serious?" It's like, why the heck does it have a lower score than Spider-Man 3? This is a way better film than Spider-Man 3. I'm surprised it doesn't really have the same score as Spider-Man, as the previous Spider-Man film did, but it has the lowest. This is the lowest rated Spider-Man film. This is the film that some of the critics have said is the Batman and Robin of the Spider-Man franchise. So Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the Batman and Robin in this series. Spider-Man 3 isn't. Anyway, what the consensus is while the cast is outstanding and the special effects are top-notch, the latest installment of the Spidey saga suffers from an unfocused narrative and an overabundance of characters. I really wouldn't say the narrative is unfocused. The main part of the narrative is involving Peter and Gwen, and also tying up a little bit of the subplot about Peter's parents carrying over from the first film. The villains are kind of like side things, but it goes in an interesting manner, and it kind of also harkens back to the source material, you know, comic books and episodic medium. You would think these critics would do their research. It's based on an episodic medium, so there's going to be some telltale signs there. I mean, even the Marvel Cinematic Universe has it. It's a little bit more subtle, and it's more how it builds up towards future movies. But it's there. And an overabundance of characters. That one a little bit, but think of it. The main characters we've got in the movie, we've got Peter, Gwen, Aunt May, Electro, Harry Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, another Oscorp executive, a character named Felicia, who I think is going to be Felicia Hardy, if I remember correctly, the Black Cat. And that's about it for the major ones. Other than that, it's minor characters. So that's not really an overabundance. Maybe it's because it's multiple villains. Oh yeah, we got a archetypal German scientist who speaks with the German accent, as Jeff put it in the theater when we were watching. Why is it always German? Because the accent. The reason it is always German with the scientists is because the accent is perfect for the German villains. And because if you look at the Till Lindemann poster I have up there, they can do crazy expressions, yeah? I know my accent, but I don't really practice it, and it's 10 o'clock when I'm recording this, so sue me. Now, the film, once again, directed by Mark Webb, and he really does a good direction with this. If there's one thing I noticed is that the film, it's shot a little bit lighter, because the first film seemed a little bit darker the way it was shot. Maybe it's just the fact that that was the origin, so they wanted to shoot a little bit darker, especially considering that the lizard and the whole sewer thing. I thought that was interesting. Screenplay is by Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, and Jeff Pinkner. I thought they did an interesting job. I don't know. Let's say the story was by all three of them and James Vanderbilt. I thought they did an interesting job with it. Okay, the musical score this time is by Hans Zimmer. That's one thing I forgot to mention in the previous film, if I remember right, was that the score in that film was done by James Horner. It was okay. It has a heroic feeling, but wasn't my favorite of the Spider-Man scores. This one I thought took that score and magnified it, because Zimmer's always good at making scores. I hope they retain him. Now, actors: Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, and Sally Field reprised their roles from the first film. Joining the cast is Jamie Foxx as Electro. Now, I know some people were a little upset by this because in the comics Electro was white, but I can understand why they changed it. I don't know much about his Ultimate Verse counterpart, which is where most of the Amazing Spider-Man mythos is coming from. There is going to be some normal Spider-Man verse stuff, like what happens at the end of this film, for instance. But I don't mind it, because part of it is the rights issue. You know, in the comics, Electro is the son of Red Skull, and since Marvel has the rights for that character, obviously, they're probably not going to bring him in. I mean, that was the whole thing involved. As we all know, rights issues, it's the whole dual Quicksilver thing. So they want to make their own character, kind of like how the Marvel Cinematic Universe did when Paramount had it, when they did Iron Man 2. Their version of Whiplash is a new character, composite of Whiplash and another character, I think Crimson Dynamo. So here they make their own Electro, and it's interesting to see how they tackle Electro. It's kind of interesting because he's kind of like I wouldn't say a foil, but he's kind of like the anti-Spider-Man with how he is, because he's socially awkward as well, but he's taking it to the nth degree. Then we got Dane DeHaan as Green Goblin.
Some people were disappointed with that. They're like, oh, Harry Osborn's going to be the first Green Goblin. That's not how it goes. But with how the film handles it, I didn't mind it. Now, I really want to check first, see what else this guy has done. Let's see, he was in Chronicle. Oh, yeah. That's why it looks a little familiar. I liked him in Chronicle. He was in Metallica Through the Never. He was in Lincoln as a Union soldier. And he's going to be playing James Dean in the movie Life, episode of Law & Order SVU, episodes of True Blood. So he's experienced, and I liked him in Chronicle. So I thought he did a pretty good job as Green Goblin. Now, his costume is in the traditional Goblin thing, and it's not a suit fully like it is in... well, partially it's a suit, but it's not like, you know, a masked suit like it was in the first Spider-Man film. The suit thing, I'm not going to spoil it, but it has an interesting premise for the film. It actually is kind of a MacGuffin plot point, but not like a super MacGuffin like how a MacGuffin should be, you know, like The Ring in Lord of the Rings, or the microfilm in a lot of spy films. But it has a thing, and why he kind of looks like Evil Ed, as my buddy Mike OCP Communications put on his Facebook. It makes sense. I'm not going to spoil it, but it just involves something we know, you know, about his father Norman, who's not in the film that long. Then we got Colm Feore as Donald Menken, who is the Oscorp board member. He's only in the film a couple scenes, and you just want to smack him. Felicia Jones plays Felicia, who might be Felicia Hardy. She did good for what she has to do. We got Paul Giamatti, and I'm probably going to mess up the character's actual name. He plays Aleske Sidevich, aka Rhino. Now, the thing I liked about him is that finally we have a superhero film that takes a villain and uses it as a bookend. Now, what I mean by that is that he's only involved in 2 scenes in the movie. Spider-Man's first scene in the movie and Spider-Man's last scene in the movie. Now, Rhino is a character that I can't really see him being the main villain of a film.
I can see him being like in a Sinister Six film, but I can't see him being the main villain, and that's because he's not really an in-depth villain, doesn't really have a lot of stuff with him. I mean, even watching him in the cartoon, in an episodic medium, you get away with like having him in the cartoon episode for 2 seconds and then having him gone the rest of the episode. But in the movie, that wouldn't work unless he does, like this. And I'm actually surprised it's taken a big budget superhero film this long to do this. Because think of it, every other superhero film that I could think of, at least Marvel DC wise, and even like Ninja Turtles and all that, all the villains we see are the main villains. Think of it, Batman 89, Joker. Batman Returns, Penguin, Catwoman. Batman Forever, Two-Face, Mr. Freeze. No, that's the next one. Two-Face, Riddler. Next one, etc., etc. as you go on. Superman film, same thing. The previous Spider-Man films, only one villain, he's the main guy. I mean, the video games had multiple villains in it, and some of them small, but then it get to the main villain, but none of the movies. So it's interesting to see that. I'd actually like to see films. Could you imagine a Batman film beginning with him having to deal with Killer Croc or chasing the Scarecrow down the street, or probably more two-time one. Hushy could probably carry his own film, like him putting the Penguin in jail again, or like catching the Joker for the 100th time, something weird like that. Could you imagine a film starting that way? I guess you could say that that Forever kind of did, but in a different way, because he's kind of the secondary villain. But it'd be interesting to see them start a superhero film more often with a minor villain, or at least have a minor villain involved in the plot a little bit more, and maybe just have him do that. And if you think about it, it kind of is going the Black Widow Hawkeye route with him, introducing him in a minor role in a previous film, and then he's going to be involved more, because we know there's a Sinister Six spin-off coming out. Now, as far as his acting-wise goes, I could say Giamatti was having fun with it, and you could tell he really is in the role. His Russian accent is a little over the top, but it fits the context of the scene he's in, because the only 2 scenes he's in, one of them he's in a car chase, so it's an intense chase, and Spider-Man keeps bugging him, so he's going to be mad, especially since the cops are on his tail. He's like, Watota! And the other one is in the Rhino suit, and he's going to get in a fight with Spider-Man, I am a Rhino! Come on! And even Giamatti admits his accent was a little hammy, but you could tell he was having fun with it. Even says on here he was loving it. Sally Field, she does well as Aunt May. If there's anything I could say is that I hope by the next film she at least knows that Peter is Spider-Man, because I know in the mainstream comics she finds out. I actually thought that the ending of the first film kind of hinted that she did know, but this film shows that she doesn't. I'm surprised she didn't find out during the course of the film, or at least in the end. There's a couple scenes that could have kind of hinted her trying to figure it out, like the whole scene we see in the trailer involving the chimney. We don't have a chimney, Peter. What? Which, by the way, the whole Peter Parker Spider-Man humor is still in this film, and he has mastered the smart aleck part of Spider-Man a little bit more, like stuff like, you having a little trouble with your gun, among other stuff. But like I'm saying, I hope that in the next film they do. Campbell Scott and Embeth Davids return as Richard and Mary Parker. Their little arc thing kind of concludes, because I can't really see them being involved again unless it's another flashback, like they go with the whole symbiote thing, because if I remember right, in the Ultimate versus symbiotes were created in a lab, which I could see they're probably going to go that way, considering Oscorp, or at least were experimented on in a lab. Chris Cooper plays Norman Osborn. He does a good job for the few scenes he's in there. I remember, if I remember right, he was up for Doc Ock at one point, and I like him as an actor, so it was good to see him for the little bit he's there. Now, look at this, I'm almost 15 minutes and I haven't even talked about the plot. Now, the plot of the film is, it starts with a flashback scene. I'm not going to talk about it because it is important to the plot, but the film starts with Peter, he's, Spider-Man. He thwarts a robbery attempt by Rhino and a bunch of his goons, and he manages to barely make it to his high school graduation. Now, around the same time, his friend Harry Osborn is returning to New York, because he has been kind of estranged from his father Norman, because his childhood and the whole thing with him wasn't his best. Now, if you thought Harry in the first series had a bad childhood, this one really didn't like his father. His father basically shipped him away to boarding schools to try to make him smart, and we find out it was for a good reason, because Norman has a disease that is killing him, and it is genetic, and Harry's now at the age that the symptoms first appeared in Norman. and he wants his son, any parent, you want your son, you want your children to do better. So obviously he wants his son to survive, and he's been researching a way to try to do a cure, which is kind of ties in with the experiments with the genetic spiders, but I'm not going to talk a lot about it. And he passes on to Harry all the knowledge he has about the cure for his illness. There's not a lot to go on, but he's going to try to. Now, as Harry is trying to do this, he reconnects with Peter a little bit. Eventually, Harry finds out that Spider-Man was actually made there somehow. Though I will say that one scene we see in the trailer is not in the movie. Oscorp's have you under observation for a while. Why is that? Isn't that the question of the day? Though it looks like the scene that line would have been in is cut out, but they edited it weird. It makes me wonder why they cut it. Maybe pacing. This film was already almost 3 hours. It's like almost 2.5 hours if I'm counting right, which is pretty long. Most of these films are usually only 2 hours, but still, I'm digressing. Now, at the same time that Harry is trying to get blood from Spider-Man to try to develop a cure, Max, who becomes Electro, he idolizes Spider-Man after he saves his life once, as you see in the trailer. It's not as bad as, let's say, they did with Edward Nygma in Forever. What I mean is his obsession with the hero, but it is there a little bit. And it's partially because I'm guessing Max kind of has a minor mental problem. I mean, he's socially awkward, you can already tell, and he is kind of dressed a little bit like almost like a stereotypical nerd, but not as extreme. He has some of that vibe. I guess it's supposed to be part of his social awkwardness. And he has trouble talking with some of his co-workers. Now, I wouldn't know what the mental disease he probably has, but it's a weird one, probably something obsessive, probably to do with obsession. He eventually has an accident, and he falls into a tank of genetically modified electric eels. I know this is a little far-fetched, but you gotta come up with a good idea. You have to figure, how are you gonna make a guy pure electricity in a semi-realistic manner? Like with Spider-Man, a genetically engineered spider, I could buy genetically modified electric eels. And he basically becomes Electro. Well, at first he's not going to be, since he's basically a man made of pure electricity who can absorb it and feel it, he's going to be going through weird things at first, and he wanders out into the city of New York, causes stuff on accident, and he's basically like, am I the bad guy? And of course Spider-Man's come down, and Spider-Man doesn't remember him, so he gets a little ticked, attacks Spider-Man, and eventually they have to subdue him, and he's put in an insane asylum that it happens to be run by Oscorp. That's all I'm going to say about that, but this is eventually where Electro, in the climax where Electro and the Goblin do converge and they go to take on Spider-Man. Sadly, Rhino's not involved with it, which I have to say is kind of a little minor thing, I might say, about the fact that how they built up Rhino with the advertisement, but it doesn't bother me because it works better with just those two going after him. If you're expecting a big drag-on fight involving Spidey, it doesn't happen in the climax, but I think that's because the fact he has to fight two villains, but the two fights he's in are pretty well. From what I've heard, the fight with Goblin should have gone on longer, but it was cut apparently for ratings issue, as well as something else I'm going to address. Now, while Spider-Man's dealing with the whole thing involving Electro, as well as the thing involving Harry and his on and off thing, as Harry's having his story arc, which, like I mentioned, that those two things are kind of like the minor subplots, but they converge in the ending, which that's why I don't mind it, because it's an interesting way to do it. Peter is dealing not only with finishing the whole thing involving his father, where he finds out more about him, and also why the spiders had that effect on him. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting idea. His whole relationship with Gwen. It continues on from the whole promise he made to the captain in the previous film, which haunts us at first, and it kind of does that, covers that whole BS thing we saw in Spider-Man 1, this beginning of Spider-Man 2, which is like, really, you're going to bring that up again? I will say, though, the way it's done in this film is better, because the Spider-Man 1, it was the, oh, if my villains find out who you are, they'll come and hurt you, blah, 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 blah. The thing a dozen superheroes have said is BS. The whole reason Superman did that stupid erase kiss. But here it's a little bit more obvious. It's guilt over a promise you made to a dying guy, so it's a little difficult. Though you can kind of understand Gwen's position, because especially if you remember the previous film, I actually hadn't watched the previous film before I went and watched this film in theaters. So watching it afterwards, I'm like, okay, that makes her reaction a little bit more genuine. Because it makes sense. I mean, you think of it, at the end of the first film, after the captain died, Peter did not talk to her for a while, and she was very upset. Then in between films they got back together, and their relationship has continued to this point. Doesn't really mention how much time has passed. And then Peter starts doing this crap. Of course she's going to be like this and like that, but you can kind of understand Peter's thing. You want to smack him upside the head for doing it, but you can kind of understand it. And then of course as time goes on, like the Tobey Maguire Peter before him, which after watching this film I can honestly say Garfield is the better Spider-Man / Peter Parker, no doubt. But after watching it, you can kind of see like Tobey's before him, that he's doing the same thing though. Hard to say which one is a little bit more understandable with it, but I'm going to lean towards this one because at least his reason for leaving his love interest is a little bit more believable, but it's a minor. It's like a nitpick moment. Now, eventually they do get back together, but it doesn't last. Because yes, this film does utilize the infamous thing from the comics the night when Stacy died. I know I should be holding up my thing for a spoiler there, but I'm not going to. My main reason is if anyone knows anything about the Spider-Man comics, they should know that one of the things that helped define how he was later in the comics was that Gwen Stacy dies. And I knew from the moment that they picked her as the first love interest that she was probably going to die. Which I guess on one point you're like, how you're going to get invested in the character that happens? True, but I liked the actress, I liked the way she was written, so I could get into it. And also the fact that I like the character means that when she actually does die, it's going to mean something. And it did kind of mean something here, especially Peter's reaction. Which this is partially why I say I like Andrew better than Tobey. Is that his reaction to a death scene just seemed more natural. I mean, you guys are, if you've seen my Spider-Man 1 review, you already know my feelings on Tobey's reaction during the Uncle Ben death scene. Too inward, not enough expression outward. Andrew during the death scene, when he's looking at Gwen, a lot more expression there. Especially when you combine it with the Uncle Ben death scene from the previous film, a lot more emotion. Enunciate! You must emote, Peter. Now, the death is sort of like the comics, she falls, but they don't go with the whole whiplash theory like apparently the comics. It is kind of, she would have died anyway, but they kind of make it seem like Spider-Man could have saved her, and it's like, ooh, that's gotta hurt. And it is very emotional when you see the look on Peter's face. Now, apparently, one of the things they deleted to keep a PG-13 rating from this, I don't remember if this happened in the comics or not, but apparently originally the Goblin was supposed to start taunting Peter that she's dead. Peter was going to go up and beat the crap out of him, like nearly to death. That would have been, that's going to be an interesting deleted scene to see if they have it on the DVD / Blu-ray. I can honestly say it might have added a little bit more emotion to the scene, but pacing-wise, it doesn't feel bad without it, just like if the Goblin fight was going to be longer. The only thing that kind of makes me mad with that is the fact that it basically, that the trailer spoiled the big money shot for the fight, or one of the big money shots in the fight. It's like, really, you had to show that? You couldn't just like do a minor trailer and just show that the guys are going to team up in the end and not show all of it? I'll say at least they didn't spoil all the Electro fight. At least that had some funny minutes, like electric version of Itsy Bitsy Spider. I hate that song! But the emotional part of the climax is the whole thing with the night when Stacy died. And some people might think that the ending kind of makes it sweeps under like a little rug a little too quickly. But they say 5 months pass, and it passes in movie time. I think 5 months is the perfect amount of time to get over the love of your life dying, at least to an extent where you can resume semi-resume normal activities. And I will say this movie did a climax better than I thought Man of Steel did, post a traumatic experience one. At least that's in my opinion. I still like Man of Steel, but I think this one handled it better. Showed some of the emotional thing, but still gave room for it could be developed in the next film. Man of Steel, it could have had Zod's death, and then maybe like him looking around going out, looking around the city, seeing it devastated. Then maybe you could have cut to him taking down the satellite in an abandoned thing. Or maybe you could have saved that. Maybe that could have been the opening scene in the next movie with him. I don't know, but it just felt like you could have handled that part a little bit better. Here, I thought it was handled well. And of course, it ends. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but the way I was thinking about it, part of it, I'm like, you know, if they wanted to, they could have hinted at Miles Morales here, but I think they would have probably pissed off a lot of people with that, and I don't know if Sony owns the rights to Miles Morales, even though he is a Spider-Man. But, on the whole, it's a very good sequel. It makes me look forward to the future Spider-Man films. I know they want to do a third one, and I know that there's 2 spin-offs planned, a Venom spin-off and a Sinister Six one, which that one really is hinted a lot in this movie, especially in the Oscorp scenes. And that character, by the way, that character from the mid-credit sequence from the previous film returns. The Gentleman, they're calling him. I have a feeling it's either going to be Dr. Otto Octavius or the guy who's going to become the Vulture. That's just my guess. For all we know, it could be someone else. Could be the guy that becomes Mysterio, but my guess it's Otto or another guy. And how they do the Venom spinoff, I don't know how they'll do the Venom spinoff. We'll just see. Also depends on if they're gonna go do straight amazing straight Ultimate verse Venom, or if they're gonna do a combination. If they do a combination, it would be amazing to see them do Eddie Brock properly and then do Flash Thompson. It'd be interesting. Now let's see, what do I give my final rating for the film? I'd probably give it the same rating I have Spider-Man 2 and Amazing Spider-Man 1. A 4.5 out of 5, because I don't really have any major problems with it. I only got minor ones, you know, like except you just want to slap Peter at times. Special effects are a little bit better than the previous film. Oh yeah, there's one thing I have to say is that they don't give any explanation for why Spider-Man switched suits, but I guess given some of the damage he occurred in the previous film, you can guess he could do it, and maybe he's refined suits since then, because none of the Batman films except Dark Knight give an explanation for why the bat suit's a little bit different. Well, other than the prototype suit with the sonar thing, that's a different story. But anything else? That's about it I could say. If you're a Spider-Man fan, I'd say give it a watch. If you weren't a fan of the previous film, probably wait for DVD. But I enjoyed it, and I'd say if you're a Spider-Man fan, go watch it. But note that it does seem to be taking a lot more from the Ultimate Verse than the previous film did, at least from what I know about the Ultimate Verse. But I have to say, how they did Gwen Stacy in this film is worth it.